Tonight, we will turn to the tracks where the evening commute has rail riders on edge. That, of course, following that deadly Metro-North crash that claimed the lives of 6 people. Tonight, we will bring you the very latest on the investigation. And the debate over measles vaccinations has parents and politicians sounding off. And tonight, we're going to bring in our legal panel here for questions as to what recourse parents might have here if their children are infected from other children whose parents decide not to vaccinate their child. Plus, is the FBI's no-fly list unconstitutional? Well, that question before the High Court. We're going to tell you why one man is taking the feds all the way to the Supreme Court. Evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. And tonight, as I said, we will begin with the latest surrounding the deadly Metro-North train crash that claimed the lives of 6 people and left 15 others hospitalized, some with very severe injuries. The Federal Railroad Administration working to determine what caused the crash that happened late Tuesday evening in Valhalla after a train reportedly crashed into an SUV that was on the tracks at that crossing, killing the driver. Now, reporter Carolyn Fortino, she's been following the story since the very beginning, and she joins us live in Valhalla this evening with the very latest. Carolyn?
Well, good evening to you, Rich, and that's right. We're standing here on Commerce Street where the National Transportation Safety Board has taken over the investigation into what caused this fiery crash that killed 6 people and injured at least 15 others. Now, we're told that experts have been flown in from across the country and that by the time this investigation is through, the NTSB will understand not only how this crash happened, but why. Officials from the National Transportation Safety Board say they have several busy days ahead of them as they begin to piece together evidence surrounding the deadly train crash in Valhalla. Chief Roger King was the incident commander for the rescue crews, one of the first to arrive on scene.
He saw the car on the tracks, immediately locked up the brakes, but they don't stop on a dime. As you say, it's a couple hundred yards as it was, and he spotted it from a couple hundred yards down. So instantly, within seconds, he was dealing with flames inside the train.
King also described a heroic effort by the train's engineer in the moments following the explosion.
The engineer himself did a wonderful job. You know, he was right there in the front, so his life was in danger, and he was able to get a couple people off as well as passengers on the train assisted others. I mean, you know, well, we do this all the time. That's the heroes in something like this. Somebody who's risking their own life to get somebody else off the train.
NTSB investigators could be seen walking the tracks in the train car that caught fire, using special 3D laser scanning devices to take images of the train. King says the safe evacuation of passengers was made more difficult because of this week's winter storm.
We got backboards from the EMS, and they tied a rope to it type of thing, and we used it as a sled and just put the person on it and pulled them through the snow. That was the easiest way.
A crane was brought on the tracks to begin the process of removing the black SUV involved in the crash as rescue crews worked to separate the train cars. Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino, who was from Valhalla, described on a more personal note why this crash was so horrific.
That train had so many flames in it, was so engulfed. The inside of that first car is just melted and charred.
Now, right now, you're looking at pictures of rescue workers from the National Transportation Safety Board still hard at work. Earlier today, a crane was brought in, and it actually removed that black Jeep Cherokee from the end of the train here. Now, the repair work has begun, and we saw earlier people trying to separate these train cars. We're told that it could be as early as tonight before some of these train cars will actually move from the tracks. Now, our County Executive Rob Astorino says that at least 400 feet of track will need to be repaired. Other necessary repairs will need to be made before service can restore back to normal. We're live in Valhalla. I'm Carolyn Fortino. Rich, let's send it back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Carolyn. And it goes without mentioning about the travel headaches also that are attached to this for those commuters. And there is no hard date as of yet when full service will be restored on that line. Files One News, of course, will continue to have coverage here as they have since yesterday and throughout in terms of the following developments with the story. But I want to bring in my first guest right now, Assemblyman David Buchwald. He represents the 93rd Assembly District, which unfortunately includes the district that we're talking about. The Assemblyman, he is on the Corporations, Authorities, and Commissions Committee, which oversees the MTA. He's got a lot of experience in this. Assemblyman, thank you for the time. But before we even get into where this goes from here, on a personal level, 3 of the names have been released, 2 of which are your constituents.
That's right, Rich, and thank you for having me on this very sad day. This train was scheduled to make its first stop in Chappaqua in my district. The next 5 stops after that were also in my assembly district. So I'm resigned to the fact that very likely the majority of fatalities and injuries are residents of my district, and my heart goes out to their families and my prayers to those who are still in hospital looking hopefully to recover. But one of the things that I'm also focused on is making sure that we know everything there is to know about what happened last night. That's certainly the reason why the NTSB is immediately on site, and why Metro North and the MTA are working to cooperate as much as they can to get answers to questions that everyone has.
You know, David, we spoke last night to eyewitness accounts. You've heard some as well as what happened. The woman apparently had the guardrail come down, and she chose to go forward. Obviously, we know the collision that happened. You've spent a lot of your career involved in transportation. We've already heard today, both in the U.S. Senate, people who have been focused on the MTA prior to this, both Senator Schumer as well as also Senator Blumenthal, but even on the congressional level, Congressman Maloney, all offering different ideas, in fact, even some proposals. On a macro level, from what you understand about what happened, was this preventable?
You know, this is a situation that clearly there seems to be some level of human error involved, but part of planning for safety is to take into account the possibility of human error. And so one of the really important questions will be what sorts of efforts could have been made, whether it's improved signage in approaching railroad crossings, improved understanding of what it means to be crossing a railroad. It's not the same as just being in the middle of an intersection where you're not supposed to block the box. There are far more serious things that affect there. But also understanding the nature of the rail car itself, the third rail, which apparently came up into the first rail car. Were they as up to the task as could have been? As the NTSB reported today, one of the things I've been looking into is the crash worthiness of the train, which is a completely separate question of would there have been an actual accident in the first place. You know, I used to serve as chairman of what's called the Metro North Railroad Commuter Council. It's a body that represents the interests of riders, and I can't help but think about what all Metro North riders are thinking today and tomorrow and going forward.
It's even some of the conversations, David, where people say, I'm not going to ride in the front car anymore, something not as innocuous as that, but even from that to the broader safety question. And I don't want to conflate different issues, but we've seen train derailments. We obviously saw what happened in the Bronx. Is there, in your, given your background and given where you sit in Albany right now, is there legitimate safety issues attached to Metro North? And I'm not, again, attaching what happened last night, which could be wholly separate, but from a macro view here, does Metro North have a problem? Well,
Metro North itself has acknowledged that they did not always put safety first. And that's been their commitment, especially since the recent spate of accidents, to make sure that that is the top priority for the railroad. You know, I think it's important that we make sure that there's an urgency established to that task, but also that we as state legislators and government officials recognize that Metro North and the MTA need also resources to establish that. The MTA capital budget for the next 5 years is up for debate right now. We need to make sure that funding is provided for these crucial safety endeavors, and that's something that I know Senator Schumer was just talking about earlier this week when it came to sleep apnea, which was one of the causes of that train crash last year. And this is something that we cannot let our eye off of. It has to be a constant emphasis, and I think people of Westchester and the rest of Metro North Territory understand that that's something that we really do need to make a priority.
And from your experience, how long till the NTSB will be able to give a report as to what happened?
They're focused first right now on gathering the information. The task that they have instantly is not to determine the cause, it's really to make sure they get all of the data from the scene so that eventually service can be restored, hopefully sooner rather than later. But then they're going to take that back. They'll issue a preliminary report, but then the final report can take many months, and understandably so. That time frame is going to first be dependent on what they learn, and they're going to be reporting on tomorrow what they've learned from essentially the black boxes, both train, signals, and some of their preliminary observations will help guide where their investigation is going to head. I think this is one of those circumstances where you want to look at things from every angle and be sure that you learn the lessons, if any, to go forward.
Finally, I'd be remiss. It's been an interesting last couple of weeks for you up in Albany with the assembly, with the shakeup specifically of the resignation of Shelley Silver from speakership, and now Mr. Hastie. To that end, are you comfortable that in expediting the vote before the February 10th, what was scheduled as the vote, you know enough about Hastie? I mean, he was mentioned in the Moreland report. There's been other questions that have come up here. Has there been enough vetting? Are you comfortable we're not going to have another embarrassment here as more comes to light in a couple of weeks here that Albany's finally got the message?
What I do know is that Speaker Hastie, in his remarks yesterday upon being elected Speaker, his second sentence was about the need for reform in the Assembly and in state government. And if he follows through on that pledge, which I very much hope he will, then we'll be better off for it. And I think Speaker Hastie, will embrace the challenge that's been put before him, and I very much hope, for the sake of all New Yorkers, that he's up to that task. That's certainly going to be the best thing.
And last thing, you saw what Governor Cuomo said, and some might say it was interesting considering he's the one who shut down the Moreland Commission, but nonetheless, that 5-point plan, do you believe there's an appetite in the legislature to go along with that plan, or does it go too far?
Well, certainly at least parts of that plan. One of the things the governor embraced is an idea I've been championing for 2 years, to strip public officials of their state pension if they're convicted of a felony involving a breach of their oath of office.
But in terms of the transparency for earned income, et cetera, do you think that everybody should put on the table exactly where every dollar comes from?
I think the people of New York are demanding changes and reforms when it comes to ethics in government, and both the legislature and the governor are going to respond to that.
Hopefully there's enough of your colleagues that are on the same page as yourself. Assemblyman, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, when we come back, we will get back to the subject of that tragedy that happened last night and Metro North. Metro North, as we speak, still facing a series of lawsuits from the crash in the Bronx back in 2013. Could the MTA get hit with more following yesterday's crash? Our Regal panel is going to join us right after this break. We'll get into that and much, much more.